NFL draft is just around the corner, going down on Thursday, April 25th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Draft night will welcome in a new class of rookies who will hope to make an immediate impact on their NFL franchises as they graduate from the collegiate ranks. For some teams who have championship aspirations, draft night is an opportunity to add a piece that will help get them over the hump, while for other struggling clubs, the draft is the time to add a new prospect to their roster and hopefully begin to slowly change their losing culture. But much like every year, draft night is always filled with unexpected twists, turns, trades, and more, which is why we're going to break down 5 potential trades which make sense on paper and could significantly shake up the 2024 NFL Draft. So without further ado, let's get into it with our first mock trade. The first deal of the night could happen early as the Minnesota Vikings enter the 2024 NFL season without a clear-cut number 1 starter, which is why they'll be one of the most active teams working the phones on draft night. And in this scenario, Minnesota completes a first-round trade with the Los Angeles Chargers to replace Kirk Cousins with J.J. McCarthy. The full details of this trade see the Vikings send their 2024 first rounder, which is 11th overall, along with their 23rd overall pick, plus a 2025 third rounder to the Chargers in exchange for the 5th overall selection, allowing them to select the Michigan Wolverines starter and help usher in a new era under center in Minnesota. Standing 6'3" and weighing in at 202 pounds, J.J. McCarthy won't blow you away with his stats, but has been a bit of a media and coach darling leading up to draft night thus far. With 2,991 yards through the air, 22 TDs, and 4 interceptions in 2023, McCarthy helped guide Michigan to an undefeated season as they won the national championship, but also did a lot to shake the notion that he's merely a game manager and has seen his draft stock skyrocket as a result. Former head coach Jim Harbaugh has been hyping up his former QB at every turn, saying his pro day was the best he'd ever seen and that he should be the number 1 overall pick on draft night. Now, all of that's easy to say when you already have your QB set in Justin Herbert, which is why Los Angeles is willing to entertain moving back in the draft in order to take advantage of some QB-needy teams such as the Vikings. There's some real debate going on amongst scouts and media outlets as to what order the QBs will go after Caleb Williams is likely selected first overall, with Drake May, Jaden Daniels, and J.J. McCarthy all having legitimate claims to be 2nd through 4th, respectively. FanDuel currently has McCarthy at plus 250 to go 3rd overall, trailing only Drake May at minus 115, suggesting that the McCarthy hype train isn't all just smoke and mirrors coming from front offices, which is typical this time of year. According to PFF, McCarthy registered a 91.2 passing grade when throwing over the middle with an 85.6% adjusted completion percentage, which is something that will translate well to the pro level. It's also something that Jaden Daniels' skill set has been largely knocked, as he tends to rely on his athleticism and picking apart the sidelines when he's on offense. So depending on which offensive coordinator and system you have in place, it could come down to a pick-your-poison style selection for who goes behind Caleb Williams. The one downside to McCarthy is his throws outside the numbers registered a 27.1% uncatchable throw rate, which was 48th out of 105 eligible FBS quarterbacks in 2023. Nevertheless, when you have a 3-time All-Pro wide receiver in Justin Jefferson lining up on one side and a second-year standout in Jordan Addison on the other, some of that can largely be covered up. With only Sam Darnold, Nick Mullins, and Jaron Hall to beat in training camp, McCarthy could step in as a day 1 starter for the Minnesota Vikings as they hope to reload and keep up in the suddenly tightly packed NFC North. The second trade on the docket we have is one that sees a lot of high-profile picks and talent getting swapped around, but also meets the needs of 2 teams hoping to make deep playoff pushes and win their respective divisions in 2024. Here we see Buffalo trade their 2024 first rounder, which is 28th overall, a 2025 first rounder, and defensive end Gregory Rousseau to the Atlanta Falcons in exchange for their first rounder, which is 8th overall. You could see why Buffalo was excited about the prospects of adding defensive end Gregory Rousseau to their roster. Standing 6'7" and weighing in at 266 pounds, the former Miami Hurricane certainly looked NFL ready when they selected him in the first round of the 2021 NFL Draft. Unfortunately, Russo's development seems to have stagnated in Buffalo. With 5 sacks, 12 tackles for loss, and 18 QB hits in 2023, Russo posted another solid season, but hasn't transformed into the game changing edge rusher the Bills thought he could be when they selected him 3 years prior. With new head coach Raheem Morris now in Atlanta, along with defensive coordinator Jimmy Lake and defensive line coach Jay Rodgers, not to mention the Falcons' need to generate a pass rush after finishing 22nd in the league with only 42 sacks last season, plus a future first rounder, this could be too good of a deal to pass up. After taking Bijan Robinson, Drake London, and Kyle Pitts inside the top 10 in the last 3 drafts, the Falcons can afford to let a high level offensive weapon slip this year and build some draft capital while adding a plug and play piece for their defensive line, which is likely what they would have been targeting at 8th overall, anyways. The fit for Buffalo is obvious. After Stephon Diggs' act grew stale, the club flipped him to Houston, but will now need someone to absorb his 160 targets that he saw in 2023. This leads them to taking the top remaining wide receiver in the draft at number 8, which could be a few names depending on how things go ahead of them. It's almost inconceivable to see Marvin Harrison Jr. fall this far, so you can essentially rule him out. There's also been a ton of chatter regarding LSU wide receiver Malik Nabers going to the Giants at 6th overall, which likely means that Rome Odunze could hear his name called here. And that is certainly no consolation prize for the Buffalo Bills. If not for the other 2 wide receivers already mentioned, Odunze would likely be the consensus wide receiver 1 of the upcoming draft. Standing 6'3" with a 4.45 40-yard dash time, Odunze hauled in 92 catches for 1,640 yards and 13 TDs for Washington in 2023. A former 4-star recruit and 2019 Nevada Gatorade Player of the Year coming out of high school, he also won a state title in the 200-meter dash, meaning that his speed is no fluke. His game log reads like someone playing Madden on rookie mode. And with Buffalo only having Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir, and Justin Shorter as their current projected day 1 wideouts, Buffalo needs a sure-handed target to help stretch the field for Josh Allen, and Rome Odunze gives that to them in spades. You could see some interesting looks on offense for Buffalo this year, as they might employ 2 tight end sets to take advantage of Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid. But the fact remains that they need a reliable wide receiver to take full advantage of Josh Allen's big-time arm. If it isn't Atlanta, expect the Bills to swing a trade with someone on draft day to help replace Diggs' numbers on offense. Speaking of replacing production, that brings us to trade number 3 between the Los Angeles Rams and the Denver Broncos. Los Angeles suddenly finds themselves with a Hall of Fame-sized hole on their defensive line heading into the NFL draft, which is why they'll send their 2024 first rounder, which is 19th overall, and a 2024 third round plus a 2025 fifth rounder to Denver in exchange for their 2024 first rounder. This will then allow the Rams to add another piece to their pass rush and select Dallas Turner out of the University of Alabama. With Aaron Donald opting to retire at age 32, the Rams' pass rush is going to look a whole lot different in 2024 than it has for the past 10 years. There's absolutely no way to replace Donald's production, as he would regularly command double and sometimes even triple teams every snap of the ball. Whether it's by trade, free agency, or the draft, Aaron Donald was one of one. That being said, the Rams will need to revamp their defensive line somehow if they hope to contend in the always competitive NFC West, which is where Denver enters the equation. Denver can afford to be patient, as the Russell Wilson dead cap hit essentially buys head coach Sean Payton 2 years of job security, as the team absorbs a $53 million hit in 2024 and another $32 million blow in 2025. That, coupled with a massive annual salary paid out by the Walmart heirs to recruit Sean Payton in the first place, and you can essentially surmise that Payton will be given free rein to overhaul this team. That means they can also afford to play the long game a bit more than other clubs who may have their executives on the hot seat and are looking for win-now moves. Simply put, Denver isn't dethroning KC this season in the AFC West, so might as well add some picks to the war chest and help retool their roster. Now, there's an argument to be made about who the better pro prospect is between Alabama's Dallas Turner and UCLA's Leatu Latu. However, given Latu's extensive injury history, which momentarily caused him to retire from the sport altogether, you can see why teams would be more inclined to take Turner over the standout UCLA Bruin. Standing 6'4" and weighing 245 pounds, Turner recorded 10 sacks, forced 2 fumbles, and was named the SEC's co-defensive player of the year in 2023. Although he seems to be more confident standing up rather than putting his hand in the dirt in an effort to generate pressures, he'll nonetheless be an impact player on day one. At a minimum, he'll fill a position of need for LA, who currently only lists DeJuan Johnson as a defensive end on their roster at the moment, but also has the upside to be an impact player from the word go once he hits the West Coast. Trade number 4 sees the Chicago Bears and Indianapolis Colts swap first rounders, while Chicago also picks up the Colts 2024 third round and a 2025 fourth round pick in the process. Chicago finds themselves in the rare position of selecting first overall and then essentially seeing where the chips fall with the subsequent picks on draft night. There's a very real possibility they can keep their first round pick and add another high end prospect to their roster. But acquiring more darts to throw at the board is never a bad thing and could help jumpstart the Bears' rebuild and accelerate that timeline. You could have made the argument they needed another pass catcher behind DJ Moore a few weeks ago, but the addition of Keenan Allen has largely filled that need for the time being. Unless you see a top prospect unexpectedly drop, you can safely assume Chicago will be willing to move back in the draft, recoup some additional assets for GM Ryan Poles to use, and walk away from the process fairly happy with their night one. And that's where the Indianapolis Colts will swoop in to select tight end Brock Bowers and solidify their tight end position for the next decade plus. The back-to-back John Mackey Award winner, Bowers comes in as one of the highest graded tight ends in the history of most scouting services, including PFF. Bowers only suited up for 10 games for Georgia in 2023, but once again showed why he's the unanimous best tight end available in the draft by posting 6 TDs through the air, 1 on the ground, and averaging 12.8 yards per reception in the always brutal SEC East. With elite after-the-catch ability, strong hands, and elite blocking skills, there's a reason why he's consistently compared to Rob Gronkowski throughout his collegiate career. The 6'4", 230-pound tight end can truly do it all. Indianapolis might not be the best fit for him for fantasy football purposes, but in terms of NFL impact, he'd be the perfect complement to what the Colts are assembling on offense. With quarterback Anthony Richardson's propensity to take off and run, having a tight end who can act as an extra offensive lineman, chip, and then release, Bowers can buy his sophomore QB valuable time in the pocket to help carve up defenses. Not to mention, it also adds a premier red zone target for a Colts team that ranked 23rd in red zone efficiency in 2023. Which brings us to our final mock trade for 2024. And this one sees the Super Bowl runner-up San Francisco 49ers picking up the phone to ship out Brandon Ayuk and a 2024 second-round pick to the Pittsburgh Steelers in exchange for their first-round pick, a 2025 fifth-rounder, and a 2025 seventh-rounder. Where there's smoke, there's usually fire. Brandon Ayuk's camp might be saying there's no desire to leave the Bay Area publicly, but don't believe for a second that that's prevented teams from acquiring about his services. Disgruntled wide receivers aren't anything new to the NFL, but don't expect the Niners front office to allow one player to become a media firestorm that could derail the season for a team with legitimate championship aspirations. Just about every mock you'll come across has the Steelers taking Jackson Powers Johnson out of Oregon at 20th overall to finally fill the rotating crew of centers since Marquise Pouncey departed. However, if they're able to nab a game-changing offensive weapon like Ayuk, expect them to pull the trigger immediately after years of operating one of the most conservative offenses in pro football under former offensive coordinator Matt Canada. San Francisco has a glut of weapons on offense and seem to be able to coax the most out of anyone who suits up in Kyle Shanahan's offense. Heading into the draft, most would agree that tackle, wide receiver, and cornerback are some of the team's biggest priorities in one order or another. While it would be nice to draft a tackle who could start immediately at right tackle and eventually take over for Trent Williams at left tackle, most of the high-end prospects will have been gobbled up by now. Same goes for wide receiver. So unless someone like Brian Thomas Jr. out of LSU is still kicking around, expect them to address their cornerback situation. Cooper DeJean out of Iowa, Quinion Mitchell out of Toledo are likely gone by this point of the draft, which gives San Francisco the choice of Nate Wiggins out of Clemson or one of Terrion Arnold or Kool-Aid McKinstry out of Alabama. All three are physical specimens whose athleticism is off the charts at a position that's getting more and more love every year with the impact of players like Derek Stingley Jr. and Ahmed Sauce Gardner. The 49ers would love to upgrade their secondary, and adding any of the three DBs mentioned to a group with Charvarius Ward, Ambry Thomas, and Diomador Lenoir instantly makes it that much more harder for teams to throw against them. That in turn allows their big dogs up front in Nick Bosa, Leonard Floyd, and Javon Hargrave to do what they do best and get after the quarterback. So there you have it. 5 potential mock trades, which could shake up draft night later this month. As always, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you have any thoughts on potential mock trades which could go down in 2024, drop them in the comments down below.